what's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus, and I am here with Chris Dahlberg. Again, we're joining forces once more for Trench Talk.
Yeah, glad to finally be doing another podcast with you now that I'm doing interviews on my own. I feel like we don't get to do enough videos and, audio things together.
Yeah, we've both been busy for sure, but it has been nice, and the regular listeners now know you a little bit better from listening to those other. How many have you done now? 2 or 3? I want to say.
I've done 3, and I've already got 2 scheduled for end of January, so that's going to be a big push this year. Should be a lot more.
Cool. Yeah, that'll be fun, and it's nice to be able to give people extra content and some pretty obscure bands you've been covering too, so that's neat. But I don't want to bury the lead too much here. I know if my intros go on too long, people start to disappear, but we're going to be talking about some of the best albums of 2020. I know there's already been, everybody's put up their list. I even put up my list, but there was still some demand in the comments for us to do our usual chat like we have been for the past. Is it just 2 years or 3 years that we've done this now? I don't know.
I feel like it's 2. I don't even know anymore.
Okay.
What is time?
Yeah, I know. Seriously, it's all relative at this point. And I have specifically used this as an excuse to highlight a few more bands and albums. So I am actually not going to talk about any of the albums I already put on my best of 2020 video. So if you haven't seen that, you can check that out. And we are also explicitly talking about albums from the second half of the year, so about like late August on, because we already did an episode on the first half of the year, and so this way you get as many recommendations as possible. So yeah, I mean, why don't we just kick things off if you want to share one of yours first?
Sure. Yeah, once again, these are in no order, and I really had to trim this list down. I actually think I had about 15 when I started, got it down to about 10. So we'll just launch right into it, and this one, first pick, barely makes your criteria. Came out on August 29th, so
yeah, I have a few
right
nail biters on here.
My first pick is Fields of Sorrow from Blood Red Fog. They're a Finnish black metal band. Used to be more traditional second wave, but on this album, they almost went Ornsi Pazuzu. They started throwing some synths in there, but instead of going all freak out and kind of weird like Ornsi Pazuzu, it's still Finnish black metal, just with some really trippy synths in it, and definitely snuck under the radar for a lot of people. I like it a lot. Was revisiting it again this week, and definitely a top pick.
Yeah. It's always nice to have both of us doing this, because even though we have similar tastes in some things, I feel like almost every time we come to do these lists, there's very little overlap. So we get to cover a lot of stuff. And you covered a lot more black metal than I did this year in general, too, because just not a lot of it just really struck my fancy. And there's always a demand for it. So glad you've been in the trenches, as we say.
Yeah, it's still my niche. So
yeah. Well, yeah, it helps. Like, I love black metal, but it just, to me, like, I want to say 2017 or 2018 were like the big black metal years for me. But since then, it's been kind of slimmer pickings. But I'll try harder this year, I guess.
Shamish for you.
Yeah, I know. Seriously, that Triangle album just blew me away. But moving along to one of my picks here that I wanted to highlight. I guess I'll start with a big one. Just to wet people's whistles, because I've definitely got a lot more obscure stuff on here, but I've got a few bigger ones. So the biggest one probably on this whole list, or one of them anyways, is Napalm Death, which I very closely almost included on my top 10 of the year, because I was shocked at how much I enjoyed that album. I have actually never been like a big Napalm Death lover. I've kind of dabbled with them over the years, and even like their best albums, I've kind of just been like, yeah, it's fine. It's grindcore. Like, I get it. I get why it's important. I respect them. But it was basically when they dropped that, it was the first single, right? With the Belly Full of Salt and Spleen. I listened to that track, and one of my favorite tracks of the year. It's just so bizarre and sludgy and grimy and experimental, and I just love the hell out of it. I kind of wish the whole album was like that, but even so, like the rest of the album's really solid, and there's like a lot of different things happening on it. So yeah, great time. One of the few like big major label efforts, aside from like obviously Deftones was on my list and stuff, but that second to that, this is probably like the biggest album that I really enjoyed from the year.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick. I mean, I really need to spend more time with that one. When you cover stuff, it kind of makes me not focus on
Yeah,
it as
yeah,
much just
same.
because, there's only so much time in the day. And I'll have to look back on that one. I mean, they've always been a live band for me. I like a lot of their songs, but man, they kill it live every time still. So I'm hoping that if tours come back, maybe
Yeah.
by the end of this year, we can see them play some of these songs.
Yeah, especially Belly Full of Salt and Spleen. I would love to see that live. That's got to be some crazy shit right there. good good stuff.
So, on to things that are hard to pronounce. There's going to be a decent amount of that. Um, this is a band that I champion as much as I possibly can. It's Urfaust, and the album's called Teufelsgeist, or Teufelsgeist, or I don't know. It's a different language. So,
one of them
these guys have
words.
always been kind of like weird medieval black metal, but then transformed into like dark ambient and like ritualistic doom. And I wasn't sure what to think of this one when I first got the press release because it said, if you want ambient release, you got an ambient release. And I was like, so there's no vocals? But there
Yeah.
are. So
Oh,
it's
interesting.
it's actually an album that they made along with a gin, which unfortunately, since we're in the US, there's no way to get it. But the album is supposed to represent the stages of intoxication from
Oh.
happiness and, like call it, like giddiness into like madness and just like bad places, and it really follows it. It's very cohesive in how they do it, and it's not for everybody. Ambient things and stretched out kind of doom drone stuff is not for everybody, but if you're open for something different, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not a big ambient listener, but it's been fun. I love the best of Bandcamp format that I kind of stumbled into because it gives me an excuse to like step outside of my comfort zone and just try kind of a little bit of everything. And sometimes I don't even know what I'm gonna press play on. And so there's been stuff in that genre that I've been pleasantly surprised by, but it's still not the type of thing I would generally just choose to throw on.
I like how on the fly you do those.
Yeah, it's fun. It's honestly more fun when I haven't pre-listened to it. Like some of them I have. Usually most of them I've kind of click play on it long enough just to decide whether or not I feel like it fits and I get so many requests, but for the most
Make
part
sure you're not
those are
just
pretty
gonna
blind
bash it the
listens.
entire time.
Yeah, I actually have I'll give a little secret on this podcast that there have been like one or two times where there was a band recorded into the episode that I ended up just completely removing because I just had generally like and it was like I would try to be nice no matter what. It wasn't me like bashing it, but I just like had so little to say that I was just like I don't even want to include this because I gave all these glowing reviews to these other bands and then it kind of feels shitty to not have like really anything for this band, and I'm just kind of sitting there listening like biting my tongue like I don't know about that, but that happens pretty rarely. So that's been good. So I'm gonna move on to my next pick though. This is a band, an album I've been just shouting from the rooftops since it came out. I think it's potentially the best deathcore album of the year, and that is the new one from Babarusa. Absolutely think that these guys deserve so much more attention. So the album's called Humanoid, and it is just so heavy. I kind of compared it a lot to like Shadow of Intent, even though it's not really like symphonic, but something about the vocals in particular. Also, Infant Annihilator, I drew a couple comparisons to, and it's just super heavy, pretty techy too, which I enjoy. I'm just so over kind of like run of the mill big dumb deathcore that just like is aping the first couple Suicide Silence and Whitechapel albums. Like, as much as I love those albums, I don't need another
There's
copy of
so
them.
much of that.
There's so many of them. So it's always nice to come across a deathcore band that puts a little bit more oomph into their instrumentation, and then their vocalist is just nuts. Like, the variety in the different sounds he brings to the table is astounding, really. So check out my full video review of that one, because it's one where I look at the view count and I'm just like, it is such a bummer that so few people, like, I look at that one versus my like joke 6 Feet Under review, and the 6 Feet Under review is like going on like 2,000 views, whereas that
People
one
like the
only
memes,
has,
man.
like, yeah, I know, man. They love a good hate review too, like, unfortunately, but I don't really do those, and so that one is just sitting kind of low. But in any case, if you like deathcore, you're gonna love Barbarossa. Definitely check them out.
I'll have to listen to that one. I just pulled up the Bandcamp, and one of their tags is Brie.
Yeah,
I
man.
can always appreciate that.
They're so good. I really thought Within Destruction was gonna have my favorite deathcore album of the year, but Barbarossa just topped them. I think Within Destruction did a weirder, more kind of intriguing and innovative album, but as far as just like pure destruction, Barbarossa was the way to go.
Nice. Well, my next pick actually ties in a little bit to your first pick, so this will be pretty cool. This is actually a band and an album I almost didn't pick up. It's Blood from the Soul. The album's called DSM-5. It's called a supergroup of sorts, so it has Jacob Bannon from Converge on vocals. The reason I almost didn't pick it up is because his other supergroup, Umbra Vitae, which was like Stomach Earth and Converge guys do a death metal band, was kind of boring. And luckily what I found out with this one is that it's actually Bannon's actually just a hired gun almost, or kind of the new vocalist here. The actual project founder is Shane Embury, who's longtime Napalm Death member. And
oh, Shane. Okay, it took me a second
the
to
first
register.
album that he put out with this project came out in 1993, and he had Sick of It All's Luke Kohler, but he couldn't get him for this one.
Shane's the one with the crazy like balding going on,
Yep.
right? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so this time around he pulled in Jacob from Converge, he pulled in Dirk, who's played with Megadeth, and Jesper, who's played with Nasum, and the result is kind of industrial metal, convergy kind of like hardcore. It's got a bunch of like really anthemic songs where I like it's screaming, but I'm like scream along to it. It's just really catchy, and I think people are probably sleeping on it just because they see all the names and they're like, well, I like the individual bands, but I don't know. But it's a really good mix of stuff and really consistent all the way through.
I remember hearing about that one, and I have no idea why I didn't end up listening to it. I must have just been way busy with other stuff, because that sounds right up my alley. And really, like, I love anything sort of connected to Converge. So, and then also with all those other members, that sounds insane. So I will definitely have to make the time to check that one out.
Definitely worth it.
Yeah. My next one is another kind of sort of bigger one, but I've called them frequently, like in the review, I included them in my best of the month too. Another band I've just been shouting from the rooftops really for the past couple of years. It's Mors Principium Est with 7. Easily the best melodic death metal band of the year. An album of the year. I hesitated for a second. I hesitated for a second there because I have another album on this list that could kind of be considered that, but then the more I think about it, the more it actually has shifted into another genre. So if anyone can figure out which album I'm talking about there, you can drop it in the comments before I say it later. But in any case, Mors Principium Est is just such an underrated melodic death metal band. I think they're every bit as good as all the other big ones, whether it be, Arch Enemy, At the Gates, Dark Tranquility, like their name belongs up there. They've just been so consistent. That's why I enjoyed doing the album tier list for them too. And just even further recognizing just how consistent they've been. Every album is really solid. There's only kind of minor variations between them, but I have to say, I think this may just very well be their best one, or at least in like the top 2 or 3. The production is amazing. The songwriting is just totally on point. It's definitely one of their most consistent albums as far as track for track. And I just could not get enough of it. I listened to this thing and probably just like wore it out on my hard drive. It's like burned into there permanently. So yeah, definitely if you like melodic death metal, especially that more like Finnish style melodic death metal with lots of energy and a little bit of a symphonic flair, then you want to check out Seven.
Have they toured the US? I feel like that might be the main difference between why they're so just unknown here.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I thought they had, but I'm really not sure. They actually had, or I don't know if they still do, but I remember another podcast, the Heavy Metal History podcast, did an interview with one of the members, and it was actually like they have a member based in the US, or at least they did at the time. So I don't know if that impacted anything, but regardless, I don't know. They just continue to get slept on, and it irritates the fuck out of me because they're so good. They're so damn good. And honestly, of the big acts, like I'm a OG Dark Tranquility fan. Like, love them to death. They are easily my favorite melodic death metal album. But I thought that Seven was leaps and bounds better than the latest Dark Tranquility album that dropped this year.
That says so much.
Yeah. It really does, especially people who know me and talk about melodic death metal with me.
Which we've done a little bit.
Yes.
All
What's
right.
your next one?
Next one is from Omegavortex. It's called Black Abomination Spawn. This is just crazy, kind of
This one I did
spiraling
listen
out
to.
of control black death metal. This band's actually, even though this is their first full-length album, they were around for over 10 years. It's called Ambivalence. So they did a name change. And so I think that's why it's so developed the way that it is. It's really fun to listen to, despite how brutal and crazy it is, because it's just like riff after riff after riff, and it's almost like thrashy death metal at times, but it has a lot of
Yeah.
memorable riffs to it. Like, a lot of times when bands do that, it just sounds like noise, and you're like, all right, they can play, but this has like the memorability factor too. There's a lot that sticks with you, and it kind of reminds me of like Tate and Blood a little bit too, which is how intense it is. Just
Oh, that's a good comparison. Yeah.
I think in terms of like the crazy black death metal, this is one of the top picks that you can find for 2020.
Yeah, that one was just like, it was true to its name too. Like that whole, I just picture this like giant swirling vortex of just like pain and viscera. It was one of those albums too where every morning I kind of open my email and I just sort of quickly check through each one, give each one a sample, put it in the maybe pile or throw it on the calendar. And that was one I listened to a few seconds and went to the calendar and was like, okay, probably got to cover this one. And sure enough, you already had it on there. I was like, all right. Well, we're in agreement.
Do you know
then.
at this point, like, when you hear a certain thing and you're like, if Chris got it first, Chris will have it. Do you know that for certain albums at this point?
Not every time. Sometimes I'm wrong, but I feel like I have. We've been doing this long enough that there is sort of like, certain tracks I listen to and I'm like, oh yeah, this, if Chris doesn't already have this on the calendar, I should probably send it his way and say that he should be the one to cover this. But yeah, that's always fun. All right, shuffling back, I'm kind of flipping back and forth between sort of more known bands and lesser known bands. My next pick that also just missed the cut of my favorite of the entire year was the latest from Fawn Limbs. Fawn Limbs are kind of like a mathcore. They're like just on the cusp there, where they're like a little bit too grindy for mathcore, but a little bit too mathy for grindcore, sort of thing. They're out of, their Bandcamp says they're out of Pennsylvania, but each of the members is from a different area, and it has members of. So the drummer is from a band that I wasn't really familiar with, but I guess in like the hardcore scene, they're pretty well known, called Commit Suicide. I guess they were this kind of like legendary sort of underground act. And then the other members are in other projects as well, including, why am I blanking right now? Also, the album was mastered by Pedram from Frontierer and Sections, who I'm planning on doing an interview with later this year because they will be dropping new material and I can hear his marks kind of on this album. But the other members are from God. It's on the tip of my tongue, and I'm just like having that brain fart that I always do. I feel like when we record.
Someone will correct you in the
I'm just
comments.
gonna find him on. Okay, so the vocalist I know best from Meyer Planer, which is another kind of underground act that I highly recommend. They put out a really sick album, and then the other one, the bass player, is from the band that I was on the tip of my tongue, and I just can't think of the dang name of the band, and I'm going to be kicking myself when I finally find it. Artificial Brain. There we go. Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, I am kicking myself because I freaking love Artificial Brain, and it was like right there, but I couldn't get it out. I almost said Coma Cluster Void, and I wanted to make sure I had it right.
I hope they have a new one in 2021 because Artificial Brain will probably be in our best of if they do.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a good mix, this trio, like coming from those kind of different sounds. And what transpires is this just utterly dark. I kind of describe it as like if you made like a mathcore version of Ulcerate. I think that's like the best way to describe it. It's got that same like just dissonant, dismal, miserable atmosphere, but then kind of a little bit faster, a little bit more of those kind of mathcore tropes seeping in there as well. But this is a fantastic album. I've actually done an interview for the previous album with Lee Fisher, the drummer, and he was just a very pleasant dude to chat with. And I can't wait to see more from these guys in the future because they've just been cranking it out. Like last year, was it last year? I think they put out a full length and an EP, and then they came back around and did another full length this year. So, and they just keep getting better really quickly. So yeah, check out Fawn Limbs for sure. They're on Bandcamp.
Yeah, Mathcore Ulcerate is like, that sounds like an awesome selling point.
Yeah, I'm quite proud of that one. I'm hoping people agree with that summation.
Nice. All right, next is probably my most traditional pick. You know, a lot of the stuff that I tend to choose is kind of out there a little bit. But my next pick is from Hellripper. It's The Affair of the
Mm.
Poisons. This is just straight up speed metal, very Venom, Motorhead. And honestly, Midnight had an album at the beginning of 2020. I think this is way better. Midnight for me kind of peaked with Satanic Royalty a couple years back, and Hellripper's kind of taken up the flag, if you will. He's just so good at doing quick, punchy songs that have those riffs that make you just want to drive real fast, crank the volume up. Just everything that metal goes back to for me.
Yeah, man, that was one too. I think that I heard just a few seconds of it in my email and was like, oh yeah, Chris is gonna do this one. I was like, this is one I'd definitely consider doing, but I'll bet Chris is already gonna do it. So I left it to you. But yeah, from what I listened to of it, I quite enjoyed it. I think both of us enjoy this kind of particular sort of more sort of like extreme thrash kind of sound, if you will, if that makes sense.
It's hard to do it well though. Like there's so many
Yeah.
of these, you're like, all right, you wrote the same 10 songs. So when I find a band like this where it all stands out, it just
Yeah.
reminds me of the classic, 80s period when this stuff started.
Yeah. Well, it has inspired me, and I was working today on my next episode of Metal for Dummies, and it is going to be for black and thrash bands. And so it just further hones for me that fact, though. There's really only a handful of bands that I like truly, really love and keep coming back to that do that style. And then I'll also be throwing in a little bonus band because they're dropping an album that same week that I'm going to put that up. So that's actually a ways out from when you're listening to this, but watch for that. But turning to my next pick, so back to another big band. So Soilwork with A Wisp of the Atlantic, which is technically an EP, but it's long enough to be a full length. Especially with that opening track. So this is the one where I kind of hesitated when I started to say Mors Principium Est had the best melodic death metal album of the year, because Soilwork is a melodic death metal band, but this is not really a melodic death metal EP. It is a straight up progressive death metal EP with like one song I would say is probably more a traditional melodeath kind of Gothenburgy sounding song, which also rips. But I was so shocked by this album because I have just not really cared for Soilwork for years. Like, honestly, not since I had like Figure Number 5 and picked up that CD have I really like enjoyed what I've been hearing from them. I've heard the singles here and there, and I've just always been very underwhelmed. I've considered them to be, one of the kind of trending downwards melodic death metal bands, along with kind of Arch Enemy and In Flames. But not as bad as In Flames, though. In Flames has been bottom of the barrel for me for a while. Sorry to you,
I don't think
In
anyone
Flames.
can outdo how bad they are now.
I mean, I'm sure there are people listening who will argue that, but I feel like if you're comparing all those bands, though, and I even did a melodic death metal band tier list, I don't think I put In Flames at the bottom because of their legacy, but as far as if we were comparing their later albums, they would easily be at the bottom. But anyways, we're here to talk about the new Soilwork, and when I heard that opening track, that's just like sprawling, massive, progressive opus, I was just like, holy cow, what is this? Like, this is what they should have been all along. Like, especially hearing Speed's vocals on that track, it's like, man, this is like it's like you just finally came home. Like, it took you this long to realize, like, this is where you belong. That's what it felt like. So I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. Keep doing this, please. Like, if you just take what you've done here and continue it on to your next albums, like, this will be one of the biggest, like, renaissances for one of these bands that I've probably ever seen. So I'm excited to see what they do moving forward. And really, every track on this album is great. I was not particularly enthused by the first single, which is the last track on the album. It's probably my least favorite, but even that one's grown on me. That one's just super kind of repetitive, but it does have a really cool kind of like heavy metal sounding riff on it. But the rest of them are just fantastic.
I'm with you on that one. I heard that and I was like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
Like, for me, I think the past handful of albums have always been, maybe I'll review it, listen to a single, listen to a couple songs, bored by like the third or fourth song, and just drop it entirely. And this one I was like, whoa, who knew they had this in them? And
Yeah.
I know they worded it that way too, if they wanted to prove people wrong. And I'm like, hopefully this doesn't become a one-off. Prove people wrong and then keep doing it, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, they have found themselves in the best possible place, I think. And yeah, they proved me wrong. I was the first to admit it. I was waiting for that EP to be a pretty negative review, but I was blown away. So what's your next one?
My next one is a band that I've wanted to reach this level for such a long time. It's Ukrainian black metal band Khors. The album is Where the Word Acquires Eternity. Khors has done this kind of like, very Slavic take on black metal for a decade and a half or so. And they've always been a band that I was like ready to just really shout from the rooftops about, but they would always just miss it. And this is the first time where they nail it. They've got a lot of variety. They've got soaring melodies that really draw you in, and the entire album's a concept album based around a group of artists and poets that lived in one house in Ukraine and were all, because of Stalin, either executed or committed suicide. And there's some really dark tracks on this album that when you read the concept and you listen to it, it hits you so much harder. And it's like the music and the concept really comes together in a way that I think is their best yet, and this is their, let's see, 8th album. So, long time running, and I think they finally hit like A+ for me.
Yeah, I didn't even realize they'd been around for that long, but I like how you described it, though, because I've had a similar experience with them where I've heard, I want to say, like, maybe the two prior albums to this one, and yeah, I just kind of felt like, yeah, this has potential. It's not quite there yet. It hasn't been in the oven long enough. I do recall kind of sniffing around this album this year and considering it because I recognized the name and had that reaction, but I'm glad you ended up covering it because, there's especially, I don't know, just the Slavic region has a lot of really cool stuff coming out of it. Lots of it black metal, but also, again, like deathcore, oddly enough, like some really cool deathcore coming out of there. But yeah, definitely one of the standout albums from that region that people should check out.
Yeah, I'd love to cover more Russian and Ukrainian stuff if we get more of it. It's just hard to find sometimes.
But more and more of it, it's been coming out there, and it's been kind of hitting more mainstream success again, with kind of Within Destruction being one of the bigger ones at this point. But yeah, my next one, back to the obscure for me, is the latest EP or EP series. So this is an interesting one, From Beaten to Death, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the album title again because it is they're from Oslo, if I recall.
Yeah, they're Norwegian.
And yeah, and it is really hard to pronounce those words. I believe they told me that I did a decent job, though, so I appreciated that they gave me that nice little pat on the back there. But this is the second time in a row, too, that Beaten to Death has done this to me, where right when I finish putting together my favorite of the year list, they drop their stuff. It happened with the last one. I think it was called like Necronomicon or Necro. It was some take on like Necronomicon. I want to say that album was sick. I probably would have included on my best of the year list, but it dropped like right at the end of the year. And then this year they did this like 4 EP series. So I did have a little bit more time, I guess, to be fair, but it still dropped kind of late. But each EP is 4 songs. And first of all, like these guys,
and it's
have
one
it
on
where it
vinyl.
counts.
Just worth mentioning
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And the first off, the most important thing, they're incredible. And I know I'm calling them a grindcore band, but there's so much more than that. They have a very experimental sound. It's very bass heavy, like this really intense distorted bass kind of defines the sort of main line of the sound. And then they'll take these detours into really strange melodic areas. You kind of never know where they're going to go. So in that way, like, don't expect them to sound like Napalm Death or Pig Destroyer or anything like that. Like, this is much more kind of artsy fartsy kind of grindcore, I guess I would put it. And it's just so much fun. And then the concept behind this was really cool to kind of research too, because each EP is based on a different forest from a different region. So they've got like one of their own famous forests in Oslo. They've got the Suicide Forest in Japan. They've got a couple tracks 4 tracks covering that one. They have, what's the third one? Now I'm forgetting one of the forests, but the last one is actually the Forest Moon of Endor from Star Wars too, which is kind of fun. Yeah, so they're each very like kind of atmospheric grindcore. Is that a thing? I guess it is now. Like, that's kind of how it feels. Like, it definitely conjures, and it's cool too because you do get a different vibe from each EP, and it kind of takes a little bit of flavor from those regions. I think in particular the one from the Suicide Forest has a lot of like that Japanese like noise and grindcore sound to it. Because there is a very sort of particular sound, as you well know, since you love covering bands out of that area. I feel like it gets very much infused into that particular one. The first one is my favorite. They're just numbered, like they each have the same title, and then it's like the Norwegian or whatever words for like number 1, number 2, whatever. But yeah, really excellent. If you like just weird out there kind of stuff that's also really fast and intense and ridiculous, then check out Beaten to Death.
I've got to say, I first heard this band in 2013, and I think it's amazing that 7 years later they haven't worn out what they do. Like, there's crazy grindcore, and some bands then do that and write the same thing, but these guys somehow stay fresh every time. Doesn't matter what it is, it just always works.
Yeah, and unfortunately they get like zero recognition for it. This was another one that I've been more picky about which albums I'll do a full video review for, because the video reviews, let's face it, take time, and I want to make sure that time is balanced for sort of the amount of actual people who will watch it. And that was one that was more of a labor of love, though. Like, I was making that video review knowing, like, okay, there's only going to be a handful of people that probably watch this one, but I just love the topic so much, and I think it'll be fun. So if I can even turn on just that few people to check this out, then it'll be worth it. Because they just, some of these bands just get zero response, and I get it, because it is definitely a very kind of niche sound, but
they get tons of great reviews, but in terms of people actually like paying attention to them outside of our circles, definitely not a lot.
Yeah. What's your next one?
All right, we're going back to Finland, but this is the only non-metal pick that I have for the second half. It's Polymoon's Caterpillars of Creation, and so this is it's like a space rock, progressive psychedelic rock, but it's actually got some passages that are almost a little bit metal with how fast they are and how dense the instrumentation is. It reminds me of a Not As Scary or NC Pazuzu, which I think is appropriate because I remember hearing that one of their members, I think, recorded this album. The Finnish psych rock scene is all very insular and they all know each other. So
Yeah,
this is a
there's
new
some
band.
inbreeding going on there.
Yeah, and it's just I heard it and I think this came out in September. It was during a period where I was starting to get burned out on the really extreme stuff, and so I started looking in my inbox for everything else, and I just heard like the layers of psych wash over me, and I was like, this is exactly what I need right now. I just need a
Nice.
chill, really fun, kind of different album, and it's awesome.
Yeah, it's nice when that happens. And yeah, I lament that I don't pay enough attention to sort of non-metal right now because there is a lot of stuff I want to check out, but I'm just so locked in now to I got to be on to the next one. I got to be on the next one. So I just like barely even have the time to sort of explore. I think the only non-metal album that I really explored this year was probably the new Smashing Pumpkins, which unfortunately did not pan out for me, and I think for most people. Some people really enjoyed it, but
The
I
singles
really
were
liked
okay,
I
but
liked the singles a lot. Like it actually gave me high hopes, but it ends up being a pretty kind of boring, overlong album that doesn't really go anywhere in my opinion.
but that's why I appreciate that even though we're metal trenches, we aren't
Yeah.
afraid to, we can do some post-punk.
Yeah.
I reviewed Soft Kill, I reviewed this. Like, I think it helps metalheads to listen to
Yeah.
non-brutal stuff every so often. You
Yeah,
just need that palate cleanser.
yeah, well, and also I feel like that's where the most innovative metal comes from is usually people who spend a lot of time listening to non-metal and then they kind of find ways to it either on purpose or just subconsciously it gets like fused into their sound and it makes for something a lot more interesting and new and we need more. That's what I'm all striving for. And yeah, it's our platform, so god damn it, we can do whatever the fuck we want. You're gonna tell me differently. Honestly, I haven't had anyone complain about that either, too, which is nice. I feel like metalheads, for the most part, at least our audience, is pretty open-minded. There's definitely still those like, ostriches with their heads in the sand who refuse to do anything, but
I'm hoping it's because of the metalcore, mathcore background. I feel like if you branch out to that stuff, you're already open to anything.
yeah, that's true. And it's funny though, because that's a good point. I actually probably get more shit in the comments for covering metalcore than I do covering something like the Smashing Pumpkins. So, or even Poppy for that
Go
matter.
figure.
People still want to shit on metalcore. We finally got over the new metal hate, but yeah. You know what? That's a good segue. I was going to talk about a different band first, but I'm going to jump right to speaking of new metal. I loved Tala. The new Tala album, or their debut album, really, because they've just had an EP before this. Matriphagy, I'm going to say it correctly now because Justin corrected me on the podcast. Also, one of my favorite interviews this year, just talking to Justin because... So just if you're not familiar with Tala, they are a like kind of new core, new metal band, very much influenced obviously by especially Slipknot and Korn. I feel like a combination of the two most closely defines their sound. But what helps them stand out is that Justin is like a vocal coach and kind of an internet personality too. And some people will have even seen him he has a very big video on like different ways to scream, basically. I forget how many views it has, but it's like some ridiculous number. And he still hosts like live streams and stuff that I'll watch occasionally. But, he just loves the art of making his voice do weird shit. Kind of like Mike Patton, which was funny because we were talking on the podcast and he didn't. He knows who Mike Patton is now, but he admitted that he only learned who Mike Patton was like within the last year or so, which was shocking to me as somebody who loves vocals.
So that means the next album will have even weirder stuff because now
yeah,
I'll listen to all of that.
I hope so, man, because he can do some crazy shit with his voice. And there are just so many moments. Like when I first listened to this, I even joked with him, like, when I first got the album and I listened to a sample, I was like, no, I'm not doing this. I don't like it. And then somehow, luckily, it cycled back around and I got a new email for it. And I'd forgotten that I didn't like it the first time. And then the second time I was like, oh, this is actually kind of interesting. And then I started listening to it. I'm like, this is actually a really solid new metal album. But then since then, it's grown beyond that because of, again, like the level of detail. And particularly, I'd encourage people to. They did a live stream where they listened to the album and the whole band was there commenting on it as they went along, which was so much fun. Like, that's such a great idea for a stream. I think more bands should do that for sure. And the number of like the stream ended up being like 3 hours long because they stopped so many times to commentate on how like one little, like there's a moment where they're like, oh yeah, this is that snare drum with the extra ping we put on it to get that dodgeball sound. And they all start laughing and telling a whole story about this like one little moment where they like took the regular snare sound and then added this like massive ping sound to it to make it sound absolutely ridiculous. And just the whole album is apparently loaded with those. And it was so fun to hear the stories. And it gave a whole extra layer to re-listening to it afterwards. And one of my favorite vocal moments, because he does so much stuff. He does like weird, like he's half black and his dad is Jamaican, if I remember correctly. And so he learned how to do the kind of like Jamaican kind of rapping style and voice for that. But then like it's all over the place. But my favorite vocal moment is he has a part where it starts in, and he corrected me too, because I didn't know the exact terminology for it, but he basically starts in this really, I forget which direction it goes. He either starts in the low guttural, like a super low guttural, and it evolves into this really high-pitched, more vocal fry sounding scream, even though he told me it's not a vocal fry, or it goes the other direction. I'm forgetting now. But it's just so bizarre to hear it, and he says it's super hard to do that because the two ends of that part are such different vocal approaches that require different parts of your vocal cords and body. But he does this seamless transition between them, and it is just such a jaw-dropping thing. But anyways, I'm gushing on this album too long. Even if you don't really like new metal that much, like check out this album because it's super interesting. It's really fun. I ended up picking up a physical copy and I honestly can't stop listening to it. But yeah, go ahead.
I don't think that I could have predicted that end of 2020, beginning of 21, new metal would click again with me. Like this album was cool.
It's coming back.
Like Ocean Grove was cool, and I've been jamming the hell out of Ghost Kid the past couple weeks. Like that came out in November. It's the guy used to be with like Eskimo Callboy. I may end up covering that the next week or two just as a late 2020 release, but like, man,
why not?
This stuff's coming back and it's good again, and we're gonna get flack for it, but I don't care.
Yeah, man, like as much as people want to shit on how bad 2020 was, and no mistaking, obviously it was pretty terrible, but musically, man, well, two things really. And I keep saying like, shit, are the 90s and early 2000s coming back? Because look, man, we got like new metal resurgence big time between this and like Code Orange too. Like there's,
they say Mudvayne might come back this year.
Yeah, they're saying Mudvayne might come back. Some of these bands are planning to tour again, and we got freaking remastered Tony Hawk.
Right?
So come on, y'all. Like you can't fault that.
All right, the next one was a really, really close battle between two albums that are both progressive death metal, and it was a battle between Exist and Black Crown Initiate. And Exist won out just barely. They're actually local to my area, but I've never seen them because they're all professional musicians and they don't tour as a band very often. They happened to just tour right before lockdown happened and I missed it. But so the album's called Egoiista. It's amazing. Like it's progressive death metal with like jazz fusion. They're all professional musicians, so there's a lot of like really cool transitions into like proggy jazzy stuff. It's very Cynic-like, and I know the main person in the band has done tours with Cynic, and I believe he was in Death to All when they were doing that tour. He was a part of that, and you can hear that in what they do, but they're not like straight death metal. They've got a lot of really, really soft sections, and it's just as much a progressive rock album as it is a death metal album, which is probably why they're not in Metal Archives, because those guys don't like it, stuff like that.
Yeah. Although I heard another big thing that happened this year. I'm going to double check to make sure I'm still right about this, because I'd heard that, I had been memeing for years, and the band even got in on the joke that Botanist will never be on Metal Archives because they absolutely refuse to include them. But I think I heard they finally caved and added Botanist.
They're in there.
Yep, they are there. I just pulled
They
them up.
are
That's
accepted
that's
based on
crazy.
photosynthesis, which I think you covered on like Bandcamp
Yep.
roundup, right?
Yeah. I'm almost sad about it because I loved making that joke so much and now I can't anymore. But hell, the campaign finally worked. They are getting the recognition that they deserve. But yeah, I didn't hear that album, but if you're saying there's some like cynic comparisons there, that might be interesting. So
It's
yeah.
long, but it feels short, and that's hard to do.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I like that too. Like that's to me those are the best long albums too, in that not only do they not feel long, but you get to the end and you're like, oh shit, it's over already.
And I
And you're
say that
ready to
because I
like
know that's
spin
one
it
of your
again.
biggest complaints about albums is you're like, 70
Yeah.
minutes? No
Yeah,
way.
man. Yeah, man, you know me. Like that was there's an album review that'll be dropping soon, for an album coming out this year that I had that initial reaction to, but it ended up being one of those albums. So I'm really excited to share that review because it was, I think, like a 90-minute album, but it does not feel that long at all. So yeah, another little teaser there. But I'm gonna jump into the band I was originally going to talk about before I started gushing about Tala, who I could really talk all day with. I'm trying to convince Justin to, because we exchanged numbers and everything, and I'm trying to convince him to do a collab with me, which would be super fun. But he's so busy doing so much different stuff. He has like another hip hop album coming out, I think, too, because he does
Oh, wow.
all sorts of stuff. But also, and I did forget to say, I am so indebted to Justin this year too for sharing the interview as much as he did, and specifically sharing it on YouTube, because obviously he has a huge YouTube following since he kind of got his start there. And so massive views for that podcast. It's become, I think, the second most listened episode of the podcast, and brought so much view time and new subscribers. And I'm just so appreciative of him for doing that, because that really helped for the growth and health of the channel this year. But anyways, I'm going to jump to my next pick, which is the one that might get some people mad now. But the reaction to the full review that I did was actually pleasantly, I was surprised that I didn't get too downvoted into oblivion. And that is the latest Inquisition album. I was not sure
We're
how
banned now.
Yeah, man, we're off the platform. But again, I did a full video review just on this album, and it did not get me in any trouble, in any substantial way. So I'm pulling up the details again on this one, because I'm actually off the top of my head forgetting. Black Mass for a Mass Grave is the name of it. It's an interesting cover too, because I didn't realize at first that it's like the Grim Reaper like shitting lava into a hole, basically. It took me a minute to realize what I was actually looking at. But yeah, obviously controversy surrounding this band and this album. I'm not going to reiterate what I already said in my review on that particular point, because I did a whole little section after I finished reviewing the music itself. And, if you want to hear more of my thoughts on that, you can check it out there. But yeah, I wasn't sure how I was going to feel going into this one with both that kind of background information and just kind of not sure where the band was at. But I've loved their past like 3 albums in particular, have been some of my favorite black metal. They have such a signature sound too, with the like really bendy strings all the time, and the croaky, very frog-like vocals. But this album caught me a little bit off guard too, because there's still all of that, but it's also, as I think I've already talked with you about and a few other people, it's a very like folky sounding album. It feels much more like nature driven. Like those other albums feel
Yeah, they
very
dug
like,
into that. It's like more earth and less space.
yeah, exactly, because the other ones are very like spectral and hellish, and like it's much kind of harsher, whereas this feels almost like there's like, I don't know, like some like old school Ulver seeping into it or something like that is the best way I can describe it. But yeah, just much more, earthbound, and kind of, there's still all the satanic lyrics and everything, but the melodies themselves just feel very like reverent of nature in this strange way. And they actually, aren't even too far away from me out here. So they're in the Pacific Northwest and enjoy very much the same scenery that I do. So it kind of does make sense to have an album like that. And despite it being pretty long too, this is one that kind of like I get entranced by it every time. And yeah, really was a highlight. Didn't quite make my top 10 of the year, but definitely wanted to include it on here because it was quite fantastic.
I also just want to call out that if you're going to sign a band that's on everybody's shit list, Agonia Records really knew how to do it. They were just like, teaser, here's the album. They knew it was going to get dropped. It got dropped from Bandcamp, I think like a couple days after they put it up. And
yeah,
I don't think it's come back, but they just stealth dropped it. They're like, they knew it was going to get a backlash, and they were just like, too bad, here.
Yeah, it's so crazy to me too, because there's legitimate albums on those platforms that like joke and meme and make lyrics about legitimately like encouraging rape and pedophilia and stuff. Like all those porno grind albums and everything, like that's okay, but this album that's not saying any of that but is, you know, allegedly from you know, bad characters is not allowed. I find that to be a little bit suspect, but I'm just anti-censorship in general, as regular listeners and viewers will know at this point. Yeah. I mean, we did that whole, speaking, you know, most listened episodes are, our most listened episode ever is our Deathspell Omega episode. And is still, I believe it has not been dethroned. I think it was dethroned as no longer being the top viewed video, but it is because Deftones knocked that the fuck out of the water. That Deftones review just blew up. But yeah, it's still the most listened podcast episode, if I recall. People like hearing about that stuff, and I think it's worth talking about. So
yeah, it definitely is.
Stuff there. What's your next one?
All right, this is gonna sound funny because you know I have a giant hard-on for Laster, and I always mention them. And so this band has a member of Laster in it. It's Silver Knife. The album's called Unyielding, Unseeing. This is you could call it a black metal supergroup if you want. It's got members of Laster, Hypothermia, Akathexis, if that's how you say it. I think you covered them before, and a couple other bands. It's kind of black gaze, kind of not. It's got very sprawling songwriting where the sound just kind of goes outwards and gets kind of bright, but the vocals are just as harsh as they get the whole time. I'd say it's almost like if Deaf Heaven had kept their earlier sound and not moved towards what they're doing now, you know, where there was still a very traditional black metal bass underneath of it. And the songwriting's great. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, I haven't spent enough time with that one too, so it's harder for me to speak on that. But I know you're you're like the king of bringing these more kind of weird black gaze ish sounding albums that go off in weird directions, and then I go listen to them later, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a Chris album right there.
I just love anything that also reminds me of Alcest, including Alcest themselves.
Yeah, well, you're in good company with the little shout out to the boys over at Metal Forge Reviews, who just got their first 1,000 subscribers and definitely deserve it. They are huge Alcest fans, and I think they said they did an interview with Dude, and he has a guest appearance on the album that I was also teasing earlier. That'll probably give another clue to which one it is. But
I know which one that is now.
All things with time. Yeah.
I know which one it is now.
Yeah, I'll bet you would be the one to figure it out. How many picks have you done now? Because I'm losing track, and I actually had more than 10 on here because I was sort of fiddling around still with the last ones I wanted to cover.
So I have one more. I will say that Black Crown Initiate was honorable mention because I realized I had 11 and I chopped the list right before we started recording. I was like, oh, I can't count. Okay.
Okay, so I have 2 more left, technically. Okay, so I think out of these ones I'm looking at, man, it's tough. I think I'll highlight Chamber, their latest album. You know, it didn't make my top 10 again because it's a pretty straightforward metalcore, metallic hardcore kind of album. It's called Cost of Sacrifice. But man, if it won't just like beat you to the ground and strangle you to death, it is just so fucking hard. If you like Code Orange, which of course did make my top 10 of the whole year and I talked about already in the first half of the year, you're going to love Chamber. These guys are just so sick. super intense. They've got a music video out for the track. Which track was it? Oh, I'm forgetting now. But in any case, check out the music video. Like, that is what got me. I'd already listened to some of their previous material, but the music video definitely got me hooked this year because it's just like a super ridiculous heavy track, and the way they shot it and the lighting and imagery around it too, like, makes it feel even heavier. And it's one of those bands too where like some of the members look kind of nerdy too, and I love it when like these nerdy looking guys are like the heaviest fucking thing on the planet. And yeah, it's great. And one of the dudes like just looks like he's like a computer programmer with glasses, but he's got his Godflesh t-shirt on. I'm looking at the band photo right now and I'm like, boy, you hard as fuck. Like, that is sick right there. It reminds me of, if anyone's seen SLC Punk, Jason Segel's character in that movie, because he's like kind of the nerdy dorkiest one of the group, but then he ends up being the one that they all have crazy stories about him like kicking out the back of the police car to like run away, and gets all fucking rowdy and shit. He just reminds me of that. But yeah, Cost of Sacrifice from Chamber, definitely give them a listen if you like metallic hardcore and really heavy metalcore.
All right, I saved the most unpronounceable one for last. It's Chthonic Cervix. The album is called Equizokium. It's AE in like the Greek style, quiz with 2 I's, and then a bunch of other letters. And it's just as weird as its name. It's black and death metal, but it's got a sci-fi slant. It's got like sci-fi sounding vocals. It's got like voivod sounding progressions within like black and death metal, and kind of like Omegavortex, it doesn't let up very often. There's always something different happening, but it just kind of it reminds me of like 2001: A Space Odyssey, if Hal actually went insane and like murdered everybody on the ship for real. Just like
Sounds right up my alley then. I love me some gory and often maybe even a little bit Lovecraftian sci-fi violence in my music. That's sort of the vibe they're going for.
No, I think it's going to be a little bit too weird for some people, but if you are like me, the weirder the better.
Yeah, the weirder the better for sure. And I think for my last one, I will give real quick honorable mentions to Cryptodyra if you want something a little bit more kind of, if you like the Dillinger Escape Plan, but also with like a little bit more of a melodic twist.
Ooh, that was close for me.
You'll enjoy them. I very nearly included them, but I'll just shout them out here, just almost as good. And then I've Within the Ruins as well. I did so much coverage of them already because this is another one of those bands that I feel like I've just been championing, if that's a word, the fuck out of for like the past decade almost, and just not enough people are taking notice. And their new album's sick too, with the new vocalist and everything. Did an interview, did a full album review, included them on Best of the Month. Like, they're good. I think I included them on like a deathcore list too. But yeah, in any case, check out the new Within the Ruins. But I think my last big highlight, I'm going to give it to Oculus with Melanoi, their latest album, or his latest album, I should really say, because it's pretty much just a solo project. Same dude who does, I almost said the wrong name, not Nightmare.
Nightbringer.
Nightbringer, there we go. So such similar names.
And Eratos.
And Eratos. Cool musician out of Colorado, just makes super sick black metal. If I didn't know him and hadn't spoken with him personally on the podcast, I never would have guessed he was just out of the US, because this just has a very, I don't know, like not US feel to it most of the time. And it's just super cool. Like, it's a lot of it's based in like mysticism and mythology, and he does a lot of trends with like dreams and stuff, because that's something that's like personal to him. But a lot of like nightmare type stuff. I loved the last album. The Dreaming Eye is probably one of my favorite things he's ever done, and that was all about nightmares. And then this is in a similar vein, because a Melanoi is like a folk creature, kind of like a succubus, sort of, that sort of like, comes to you in your dreams and does bad things to you. You don't want them around. So there's one like right on the cover. I'm pretty sure that's what that's supposed to be, and just dark atmospheric, massive sounding black metal that you can't believe is just coming from one person, from the vocals to the guitar to, everything else. This is just another astounding album from one of the busiest black metal musicians out there, and one of my favorite regions for just super heavy music. There's so much good stuff coming out of Colorado. It always interests me though, and I talked to him about it on the podcast, that he kind of keeps to himself though, because like most of those Colorado musicians have a very like close knit group kind of around like Ethan McCarthy of Primitive Man and that whole crowd, but he just sort of stays on the outskirts, and he's a bit of a hermit and does his own thing, and you kind of hear that in the music. But yeah, good stuff.
I need to listen to the whole thing. I actually just listened to your review of it
today.
today.
You haven't listened to the whole thing yet? Oh my god, that surprises me, because I know
priorities,
you love
man.
this dude. I know, but I would have thought this would be a priority for you, because I know you love, especially like Nightbringer and stuff. You're like, I feel like you were quick to snag the last Nightbringer album, and that shocks me.
I like it. I think I just got tired of the approach. Because I think
they are all
Nightbringer
very
kind of
similar.
He felt like he was repeating himself in Nightbringer, so I think with this one there's more differences.
Yeah, I would agree. Because I had the same feeling. I thought the last Nightbringer was just kind of okay. I really did enjoy Eratos though, and I actually think that this is potentially better than that Eratos album. So he's back on a upward swing with this stuff. But yeah, I think that'll kind of round it out, and we're at a like kind of a good time here. We're almost at like a perfect hour. I'm not going to do the clips this time just because that's a lot of clips, and I only have so much time, people. Like, it's hard enough when I'm doing reviews and I'm putting in, 6 or 7 clips into it. But with the podcast, I've tried to scale it down more to just like 3 or 4, and I'm not doing one for all the bands. You'll just have to go check them out yourselves. I know. So it's so sad, but I hope we did enough justice to them to warrant you wanting to check them out and learn more about them, jot them down. I will put their names in the description, even though that can be a hassle in and of itself, because we're talking about like 20 band and album names and potentially linking the albums. I will do my best. I'm a busy man these days, and so is Chris, because he's got stuff going on too. But any final words before we wrap up here?
No, I'm glad we got to do this. Wasn't sure if there was going to be time to do it, but I know people always enjoy it after kind of the way we split up the halves, because I always read the end of year lists that come out around this time, and I'm like, how do you get 10 out of the whole year? Like,
it's hard.
The way we split it up,
really
we have 20, and that was hard enough.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's hard. Yeah, we end up, between the podcasts, we end up with 40 picks this year. I think it does help me to do the monthly roundups, because then I feel like in my head, if I leave something off of the year list, I'm like, well, I covered it in this place and this place too, so I don't feel as kind of like guilty almost. But yeah, it is hard to whittle it down to just 10 for an entire year, especially when I feel like I'm covering more and more albums every single year. So I'm just more and more requests and more in tune with more bands and have more favorites that I recognize their names each time. So it just becomes this insurmountable climb.
Yeah, and you're jumping at stuff now I wouldn't even expect you to do. You're getting requests for songs and bands that you haven't really done before. I've seen some of the recent like single where you just watch like the music video, and I'm like, he wouldn't have covered that band 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm trying to broaden my horizons, especially with symphonic metal this year. I'm going to check out that Epica album, because everybody's screaming about it, and it seems like it'll be a popular one that people want to see. And actually, right now, I am putting up, I meant to put it up earlier, but I forgot to hit save. Like, literally, as we just spoke right now, I hit save on dropping my reaction to the newest Corpiclani song, which is a band that I've been sleeping on forever. I didn't realize this will be their 11th album. That's insane. So
yeah, they're long running.
Yeah, I'm gonna be checking out more of that with the new album too. Yeah, this will be the year where I try to really branch out, and I'm also trying to do a mix. Like, I try to cover a big band that everybody wants to hear from to get it like maximum number of views, so that promotes more subscribers, and then I'll still do the small bands then that I can kind of turn around and then be like, oh, you like that? Well, check out these guys, and just wave it in front of your face. It has to be a balance. So if I only do the small bands, the channel won't grow, and it'll just be the same people seeing the same stuff over. I want to grow these bands' audiences, and that seems to be working pretty well. Well, I think that kind of wraps it up then. Thanks again for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Both of us having busy schedules right now.
Yeah, it's always fun.
And yeah, looking forward to seeing more of your interviews. I have another interview coming up this month as well that I should be recording next Friday and hopefully have it up soon after. And I think, Chris, you said you had 2 mapped out for this month
probably,
as well in January?
Yeah, probably be up middle of February just because they're both going to be recorded around the end of January.
Okay. Sounds good then. Well, look forward to those. And again, if you're new here, you can listen to this podcast on basically any platform. But regardless, I do encourage you to also subscribe to the YouTube channel because I'm putting up videos pretty much daily at this point, sometimes multiple times a day. Like I think I've put up 3 already today. So sometimes it be like that. So you'll be missing out if you're not getting all that supplemental content. But thanks as always for listening. You can also chat with us on the new Discord that we started, and as always, support on Patreon too. But this is Flight of Icarus and Chris Dahlberg signing out, and we will see you in the trenches.